Cue the great 80s music again, because we have another great 80s theme song in store for us for this review, and I am back talking about my James Bond reviews, of course. Leading up to No Time to Die in April, we have reached the 14th installment in the Bond series, and that in the first one to star Timothy Dalton as James Bond. Yeah, that's right, the series no longer stars Roger Moore. There's different accounts as to how Roger Moore left the series. There were accounts that he left on his own. There were accounts that the producer, Albert R. Broccoli, let him go, but nevertheless, we get Timothy Dalton in his first of two Bond films in here, and that is The Living Daylights. So as I've said, The Living Daylights is the first Bond film to star Timothy Dalton, and a little bit of background with The Living Daylights. Before Timothy Dalton was even supposed to be James Bond, the role was originally offered to and accepted by future Bond actor Pierce Brosnan. The reason why Pierce Brosnan didn't end up making The Living Daylights is because he was on contract at the time from a TV show in a studio called Remington Steele, and he could not break that contract. And if he had broken that contract, it would have been a breach of contract. He probably could have gotten sued. Eon Productions probably could have gotten sued, so Brosnan had to stay and complete his work on Remington Steele. He'll definitely come back around, though, in a couple of movies. We'll talk about him when we get to GoldenEye. So they had to find somebody else. Timothy Dalton's name kept popping up, but Timothy Dalton wasn't really that interested in taking the role of Bond. It took a lot of convincing from his wife to play Bond, and once Timothy Dalton accepted the role of Bond, he set out to create something completely different from Roger Moore's Bond, and a lot of people argue that Timothy Dalton's Bond is probably the most accurate to Ian Fleming's source material, which I gotta kind of agree with that. I will say Daniel Craig's portrayal is the most accurate. Timothy Dalton presents a darker, more brooding Bond. He plays that reluctant hero. You can tell through his portrayal of Bond that the character of Bond is really disenchanted with his job, and that's something I really love about the two films Dalton made. His portrayal of Bond in that regard is very accurate to the source material. My only problem with Timothy Dalton as Bond, especially in this movie, is that I feel as if Timothy Dalton just lacks the charm. I look at Timothy Dalton and I'm like, I feel like you wouldn't be able to just bet a girl like that, you know? It would have to take a lot of convincing. Roger Moore definitely had the charm. Sean Connery definitely had the charm. There's too much of a ruggedness to Dalton's look that I just think doesn't present that charm that all the Bond actors have, with the exception of George Lazenby. That dude has no physicality and no charm. I hope I never have to bring his name up on this channel ever again. But let's get into The Living Daylights. As I've said, The Living Daylights is Timothy Dalton's first Bond movie. It was released in 1987, and this movie is fresh off a critical and commercial failure of A View to a Kill, which kind of disappoints me, because I do like A View to a Kill. For a period of time, it was also the last Bond film to take its title from an Ian Fleming title until 2006's Casino Royale. And The Living Daylights in Ian Fleming's novels was actually a short story, which forms the basis of the first act of this movie. And this movie involves Bond escorting a KGB agent, Koskov, out of Czechoslovakia after a sniper is trying to kill him. Koskov believes that there is an assassination attempt out on his head by a corrupt general, General Pushkin, when in fact, General Koskov has actually staged everything, and he is actually a mastermind who is working with Whitaker. And his deal with Whitaker involves supplying weapons to the Maharaji. Koskov has an arms deal with Whitaker, who is played by Joe Don Baker, and one of the movie's main villains, and that Koskov supplies weapons as long as Whitaker gets his opium. That's a huge gist of the plot right there. Of course, I always talk about spoilers with these Bond movies, even though I don't give you a spoiler warning, but that's really the gist here. I find The Living Daylights to be an enjoyable Bond film. It's not my favorite Bond film. It's not even in my top 10 for Bond films, but it's an enjoyable enough ride. Like I said, I already talked a little bit about Timothy Dalton. I do like his portrayal of Bond, minus the fact that he doesn't have the charm, but he is good as Bond. He sticks very close to the Ian Fleming source material. And that's what I love about Timothy Dalton's Bond, especially in License to Kill. Can't wait to talk about License to Kill. Miriam Diablo plays the Bond girl, Cara Milvoy, I don't know how you say her name, but she's actually the one that is the sniper that is trying to kill Koskov and Koskov's girlfriend. John Rhys Davies is in this. You might know him as Gimli from Lord of the Rings, and the voice of Kasim from Aladdin and the King of Thieves, Aladdin's father. I love John Rhys Davies in here, and you also might know him as Sallah from Indiana Jones. He's great in this. I love his performance. I never ever expected John Rhys Davies to be in a Bond movie, but he is. He plays General Pushkin, and I love General Pushkin and Bond's relationship in this movie. They work so well in tandem, and I love what they ultimately have to do. I love how they ultimately fake an assassination attempt to show up Koskov, you know? I love that. It's great. The action sequences in here are great. My favorite action sequence in either of the Dalton movies involves that car chase in the snowy Alps. This is actually one of my favorite Bond cars. Forget about the Aston Martin DB5. That is a great Bond car. Forget about the BMW in Tomorrow Never Dies. This is one of my favorite Bond cars. I love it. It's one of my favorite chase sequences. I love when Bond's on the ice and he's just doing donuts and then all the other cars fall into the ice. That's great. I love when he shoots a rocket out of his car and blows up like an 18-wheeler so that he can get by. Great stuff right there. Great stuff right there. This is the one next to the DB5 that I think has the best gadgets. The BMW might be the best car driving-wise, and we'll get there when we talk about Tomorrow Never Dies, but I think gadgets-wise, this car, my favorite Bond car. And it looks like this car is coming back in No Time to Die, so I'm really excited to see what they're going to do with this car in No Time to Die, if they do anything. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. The DB5 is going to probably play a more prominent role in the movie than this car. One of my favorite henchmen is also in this movie, and that is Necros. Of course, he is a blonde henchman. That stereotypical blonde Bond henchman. You know what he does in this movie that is awesome? Well, he throws milk bombs. Yes, so he poses as a milkman in one sequence, and he's listening to music, and in order to pose as this milkman, he strangles a guy with his headphones, then picks up a case of milk and starts throwing them at MI6 headquarters to blow them up and try and kill Koskov. But we actually find out later on that Necros and Koskov are in the same league. Necros is amazing. He's a man of few words. Yo, follow me. He's got this slick-backed blonde hair. You immediately know that he is up to something. And when he starts throwing those milk bombs, it makes for a fun sequence. I've always really loved the pre-title sequence of The Living Daylights 2. It's probably my favorite aspect of the movie, honestly, because it's a training simulation with paintball, but then it actually leads to a fellow 00 agent, 004, being assassinated. And this comes back around into the plot because there's a note on him. I forget what it says. It's like Siore Semporum or something like that. And Pushkin reveals that he's like, no, that's not in law. That's General Koskov, and that's how you find out that General Koskov is actually the main villain. And that is stuff like that ties this movie together, that really makes The Living Daylights an intriguing movie. This actually got a way better critical reception, and a lot of praise went to its story and Timothy Dalton's portrayal of Bond. And it does have a rich story, an engrossing story, a story that is really great to follow, and it connects the dots so well. It has a couple of things that are going on at the same time, similar to Octopussy, but the movie is able to connect the dots a lot better than Octopussy. It seemed like Octopussy didn't know which of the two plots it wanted to tell. This one, because Whitaker isn't really in the movie all that much and the focus is more on Koskov and Necros, we actually get a better understanding as to what story this movie wants to tell, and it's a lot easier to follow because of that. My issues with The Living Daylights actually rely in one of the villains, and that is Whitaker. Right? First of all, he's played by Joe Don Baker, and I'll get to this when I talk about GoldenEye, but he comes back to play a different character in GoldenEye. And I've already kind of talked about this with some other actors and actresses, that it doesn't really make that much sense, and it's very distracting when that happens. That's a whole nother story for another time. But my whole thing is that Whitaker is actually the brains behind the operation, and Koskov's just kind of working for him. It's really kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit, despite all those great story connections to how well it's able to tell its story with multiple villains, and Whitaker not being in it all that much. He just kind of goes down like, all right, he's out, he's down for the count, he's gone. So I always thought Whitaker was one of the weaker aspects of the movie. I also think that the more calm moments of the movie, while the movie needs them, just kind of derail the fast-paced entertainment of this movie, and that is when Bond and Kara are kind of hanging out at a carnival, and it doesn't really seem like there's much going on. Those moments slow the movie down for me, and yeah, I get that there's kind of a bond right there, but Bond ultimately has to pose as a friend of Koskov because he knows that Kara is Koskov's girlfriend, but then when he's like making out with her at the carnival, I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, this doesn't really make that much sense to me, and I really don't. Again, it kind of goes back to Timothy Dalton's charm. It just, I don't see how a woman could throw herself at Timothy Dalton's Bond like that. I mean, she doesn't really throw herself at him, but like, just allow something like that to happen. I felt like up to this point, there wasn't a natural progression. Luckily, with Pam Bouvier and License to Kill, I feel like there's more of a progression there, you know? Those are really my biggest issues with The Living Daylights. This is a perfectly passable Bond film. This is a great intro to Timothy Dalton's Bond. While he lacks the charm and Whitaker isn't as menacing because he's not in the movie all that much and he kind of just goes out like that, and some of those more calm, slower moments seem to tank the pace of the movie, this is a very rich and engrossing story. Maybe what the Bond franchise needed after the Roger Moore era. A lot of people complained about that era. And it's got one of my favorite car chases, one of my favorite cars, one of my favorite pre-title sequences, one of the best theme songs, another 80s theme song that is also really great. Necros is a great henchman. It's an all-around good Bond movie. Would I say it's great? No. Is it good? Yes. And while at some times it does get a bit boring, I think it's because I've seen this one the most out of the two Timothy Dalton ones, and it was the one that I always used to watch because they released like those box sets, like the 007 Ultimate Edition, Volume 1 through 4. This was in Volume 1. It was the first one, so I always watched this one first when I did a Bondathon. So for me, it got a little bit boring after a while, just watching it so many times, but I'm not using that against the movie. It's just me watching the movie so many times, I guess. I'm gonna give The Living Daylights a B. If you were not a fan of the Roger Moore era, definitely give the Timothy Dalton era a try. And I'm really curious to see what this movie would have been like if it was Pierce Brosnan in the role. Kind of similar to how I feel with On Her Majesty's Secret Service if Sean Connery had been in the role rather than George Lazenby. God, I wish that happened. Thank you so much for sticking around for these Bond reviews. Can't wait to talk about No Time to Die in April. Can't wait to talk about the rest of the Bond films leading up to that movie. You guys are the best. I will leave my link to my website in the description below. You will find all my links to my social media accounts there. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden. Stay tuned very soon for my review of License to Kill. I'll see you at the movies somewhere.